Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for That Which Survives, which is episode 14 of Season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the third season episode of That Which Survives. So, That Which Survives is the episode where Kirk, McCoy, and Sulu and a nameless blue shirt, who's actually should be a red shirt, beam down to investigate this strange planet. However, as soon as they go down there, there's this alien entity in the form of this woman who goes around killing people and then disappearing magically. The Enterprise is flung across the galaxy, leaving the landing party stranded there as they try to find a way to survive on this planet with no food or water. The woman reappears at random in order to touch a specific person in order to kill them. The blue shirt, of course, is killed, but then the three of them catch on to the fact that the woman can only kill a specific person and use tactics to try to outsmart her. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is sabotaged on their trip back and is speeding to its destruction, and Scotty and Spock work together to save the Enterprise, while Kirk, McCoy, and Sulu eventually are outfoxed by three different versions of the woman who have them cornered, but Spock arrives in the nick of time to save them, and they find out that the planet they are was a station constructed by an aliens who died of a virus a long time ago, and the woman they've been seeing was its leader. However, she had turned on a security system until other members of her species arrived, but they never came because that species was likely wiped out by that virus that killed them. So, this is another Season 3 episode which is not looked on pretty fondly. A lot of people state it as a very bad episode and one of the poorer episodes of the original series. And it's one of the episodes that I really, really loved when I was younger. When I first watched Star Trek as a teenager, I remember putting this in a lot of my top 10s and favorite episodes. Well, maybe not top 10s, maybe more like top 20s. But it would be, and I would consider it one of the higher echelon episodes of the original series. Now, as I got older, my opinion of this episode did go down, especially hearing how much everyone else didn't like it and why they didn't like it, and some of their arguments that were persuasive for me. But that being said, I still like this episode. Maybe not as much as I used to, but I still think it's a decent episode. Definitely, I would say, like, as I said, in the second tier of Season 3 episodes, and I like it better or just as much as many Season 2 episodes. And not all of that has to do with nostalgia, but I have to admit this. Surely nostalgia does play a factor on why I do enjoy this episode. But as I say, as I sit down and watch and analyze each episode for these particular reviews, I try to be very analytical and pay close attention to the episode. And by doing so, if there's an episode that I like purely for nostalgia, I'll notice it. I'll realize, oh, there's tons of mistakes, and I'm just being blinded by nostalgia, and sometimes that's fine, but I just admit that yes, a lot of it does have to do with it. But honestly, like, even if I saw this episode for the first time ever, just now, I would still enjoy it. I would still like it. I think it is a very interesting concept, and it's suspenseful with a lot of high sort of stakes involved, and it keeps me very interested. And of course, I love the fact that Sulu is one of the three main characters on the planet, because I like when they utilize some of the lesser characters, and they introduce a helmsman to replace Sulu, who is in fact a Starfleet woman, which is not very often we see a woman in Starfleet who is actually a good officer. Usually they, bring Kirk his coffee or whatever, or have like cutie eyes or whatever, or a receptionist. And so it was interesting to have a competent female officer who seemed very competent at her job. And so yeah, I found the character of I'm trying to look up her name, but the image of the woman that was protecting that outpost, that was a very fascinating concept. The fact that she seemed to have like a good heart. Lasara, I believe her name was. She seemed to not want to kill people. She seemed genuinely upset by the fact and confused when Kirk and the others were scared of her. And it's because, and they explained this at the end of the episode, that the security system used her image and used her personality too perfectly. Like they replicated her exactly. And so the purpose of her image was meant to kill any invaders. And yet, she seemed to have sympathy for them. Now, I just recently watched this podcast, which I referred to a couple times. I've been watching it a lot recently, Enterprise Incident. And there's episodes I really don't like where they truly defend and be like, oh, this is so brilliant. I'm like, no, it's not. It's terrible. And then there's episodes I really like that they don't, where they nitpick every little thing. And I think, to me, this is one of the worst examples this episode, because the guy was nitpicking all these tiny little things, and a lot of times I found myself like yelling at the screen going like, no, and he'd ask a question, why did they do this? And I'd answer it. I was like, this is why, can't you see? And one of the things he said particularly that I wanted to bring up was that at the end of the episode, when after Kirk defeats the computer system, he says, oh, they used their computer security system's recreation of Lasara was too perfect because it brought about her empathy and her hesitation to kill, which is what allowed us the time that we needed to survive, to avert her. And this podcaster guy was saying, oh, when did we see that? I didn't see that happening. I'm like, well, pay fucking closer attention. Very clearly that was happening in this episode, where Kirk was having a conversation with her and being like, and she was showing hesitation, and they were engaging her, being like, why do you want to kill? And she's like, I don't want to kill because it was it was incorporating her personality too much. They clearly showed this. Like, how can this guy miss it? It's funny because I know some people might feel that way when I really tear down an episode of Trek, but I will stand by my earlier criticisms of bad episodes, and a lot of times when people do point out things, I'm like, well, that doesn't change what happened. But here I'm on the other side where I'm thinking he's just being overly nitpicky for no good reason. and other things he's saying, oh, this doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, sure it does. And then there's some cases where he's right, it doesn't make sense, but I don't care. It's not that big of a deal. But anyway, so I think, and again, I don't think it's nostalgia why I would defend this episode or why I enjoy this episode, or not mostly anyway. I'm sure it's a factor. But I think it's more of the fact that it's a very interesting concept. And I like the concept of Lasara and how... So, let me talk now about DC Fontana, because she originally wrote the idea for the script, but it was changed apparently so drastically that she used a pseudonym, which she always does for episodes that she doesn't like or doesn't want her name attached to. She's like, and apparently she did have a quote saying that she only watched the episode once, and the script that they used, the shooting script that they used for this for the episode was bared very little resemblance to her original script, but she will enjoy getting paid and get the money for it. She just didn't want to use her original name for it because it doesn't really resemble what she wrote, and other than that, she didn't really think much of this episode. Now, I read a few aspects of what her original script was, and to be honest, like, the specific changes I saw seemed to me to be for the better. For one in particular was, apparently it wasn't Lasara, or this woman who was going around touching people and saying, "I'm for you." It was a, sort of energy monster with talons, and then it would and apparently rip that red shirt or blue shirt, as the case may be, to shreds. And to me, that seems B-monster cheesiness to me. And I think the change here of having it be the image of a woman with empathy is a much more fascinating idea. To me, this is what makes the episode really interesting to me. Had it simply been a monster going around going, grrr, I would have thought a lot less of this episode, to be honest. It would be just another monster of the week, B-movie fodder, killing off red shirts sort of thing. And I think, I would have thought a hell of a lot less of the episode. But, to be fair, the other aspects, I hadn't read her original script, so I can't really state, whether it's better or not. I'm just saying that particular aspect, to me, this change sounds better. The other changes sounded like, it didn't really make a difference one way or another. But now I'll get to my largest complaint I do have about this episode, where I feel other people like that podcaster I mentioned complained about this episode are correct, and I'm in agreement with them that this is the biggest flaw in this episode, is the fact that Spock is completely and utterly out of character for this entire episode. And that is something I'm sure was changed from DC Fontana's original script, because no writer understood or could write better for Spock than Dorothy Fontana. And I'm sure, and I haven't been able to find any quotes or direct information that state this, but I'm sure that was a large reason why she distanced herself from the script, because Spock was written so poorly and so out of character, especially for someone like her, who was the best at writing Spock in his development and showing the human side of Spock. This, the way Spock was portrayed in this episode does remind me a lot of how Data, there's certain episodes, and I'm sure I'll go through this as I go through the Next Generation episode by episode, which I'll get to eventually. But Data was similar in terms of, you can tell when there was a writer who didn't really understand Data's voice, who didn't really understand how to write for Data. There were certain episodes where he was kind of out of character and acting too mechanical or too much like just a logical android, and they missed the humanity within Data. And to be fair, I think for the original series, I think this is the only episode they did that for Spock, where I think there was a couple of episodes that did that for Data in the TNG. I can't think of them off the top of my head. I said I'll have to notice them as I go through TNG. But yeah, this seems to be either the only one or the worst one. It's the only one that I really noticed. Maybe there's other ones where Spock's voice wasn't quite there or quite right, but it wasn't as big of a deal to make me stand up and notice. Where this episode, it is hugely noticeable. Or maybe there's, no, I was thinking, what's it called? The Gamesters of Triskelion. But actually, it wasn't Spock who was out of character. It was Scotty and McCoy who were just being too much of an asshole to him. So they were the ones who were kind of out of character. But here is Spock who's out of character because, again, they lost his, sort of the same thing they did with Data. They lost his, human side, his emotional side. He is a huge friend to Kirk. He deals with human beings all the time. And in fact, a lot of times he has, especially with McCoy, he will banter right back and forth. Like the Tholian web is a great example of him interacting with the humans he works with on their level, and even though it does lead to conflict sometimes, that he is actually really, and he does it in his logical, stoic way, but he's actually good at recognizing how to communicate with human beings. Where here, this doesn't seem like Spock at all. He's being logical to the point of being obtuse. Like, he's completely obtuse, and he's very nitpicky, and he's very disdainful for any sort of small figure of speech or any small display of emotion, which is not how Spock has behaved. He has shown disdain for emotion, and especially huge outbursts of emotion, but not in the very micromanaging, very nitpicky, very hyper-focused way he is in this episode. It is completely and utterly out of character for him. And he has all these like quips. I don't know if it's meant to be funny, if the writer who took the script and wrote the script, because the writers who adjusted the script were regular script writers in season 3 who's done so for many of the scripts in season 3. So I don't understand how they could get Spock's voice so wrong, except for maybe they wanted to make it humorous, or maybe this was Fred Freiberger his doing, because he didn't quite understand the characters of Star Trek as much as some of the other writers. Or maybe they were just wanting to make this sides plot with, the Enterprise going off into space more interesting. Because that is the one thing that was changed from D.C. Fontana's original script, was there was no peril of the Enterprise being sabotaged and almost destroyed. Their trip back from where they got sent was actually really uneventful. Which I actually agree with putting the Enterprise in danger and upping the tension and the stakes. I don't think it's fake stakes. I think it makes sense. And I do think it helps the tension of the episode and helps the story of the episode overall. But it's just the Spock's character's aspect of it is what really doesn't work. And again, I think maybe they added that in to make it funny or create more emotional drama between the specific characters. But it's so out of character the way he constantly chastises anyone. Like when the helmsman who took over for Sulu was like, oh, we're going to arrive there in like 10 hours. And he's like, actually, it's 9.74. I wish you would be more precise. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, that's not how Spock talks. And then when Scotty is like trying to save the ship, and he's talking about how he's right by the antimatter like thingy, and he talks about how it feels like there's ants crawling all over his body, Spock is like, I wish you should refrain from any emotional descriptions and just get on with the job. Again, that is not something Spock would say. And then they top it off at the end when Scotty saves the fucking ship. And Spock's like, you have completed your task, Mr. Scott. And he's like, well, the least you could say is thank you. Spock says, he goes on like this tangent that like trails off about, well, I don't understand a human being's needs is for gratitude. Why do I need to say thank you? You were one man engaged, and he goes off in this thing, which is so dumb. It is so incredibly out of character for Spock. This is not how Spock behaves. In any other episode, he's logical, yes, he's a Vulcan, yes, he doesn't really like expressing or interacting with human emotions, but he knows how to, and he does show some slight humanity, particularly in the way, like I described in that scene in Tholian Web, when McCoy had his outburst. He was like, he's like, I understand, Doctor, if Captain Kirk were here, he would probably say something like, forget it, Bones. Which is like such a great like interpersonal way to handle the situation. Where here he's just like so obtuse and so acknowledged. Like even Horror says something like, she's worried about the captain. She's worried about Kirk and Sulu on the planet and McCoy, and asks Spock, well, what are the chances they're still alive? And Spock comes up with this huge asshole response like, we're not engaged in gambling. There's no point in speculating on what happens to him. Our job is just to get back there and discover. Like, I just really wanted to bitch slap him through most of this episode. And that's not how, as I said, this is completely out of character for Spock. It's totally, whoever wrote those Spock for this episode had no understanding of how to write for Spock and the nuance of this character. And as I said, like, I don't think there's any other episode that is as bad as that. So yes, that was definitely the huge low point for this episode for me. But, as I said, I didn't really have an issue with the rest of the episode. I mean, yeah, there was a couple logical fallacies every once in a while. But, and again, that podcaster was like nitpicking, complaining, like the point where the woman was there for Kirk. And, he nitpicked about the fact she would say who she was there for and how that makes her less effective. But I think, again, that's the flaw of using the woman and what he said didn't happen, having her empathy be able to slow them down. He's like, I didn't see that happen. And he nitpicks and say, why is this happening? Because of that! God! There's another person I wanted to bitch slap. So that makes perfect sense. And then he's also complaining, like, when, Kirk was the one she was there for, and McCoy and Sulu were blocking her path. And he was like, oh, he stepped aside. She could have easily touched him. Like, no, she couldn't have. Like, it was a couple steps away. Like, McCoy and Sulu would have easily been able to block her. I don't know. Anyway, I shouldn't nitpick about that, because I'm sure other people see my reviews and nitpick me like that, so I'm just being a hypocrite now. But I don't know. I do think it is a sign, because when you don't like an episode, which this guy clearly didn't like this episode, you are more likely to nitpick and point out flaws and notice more flaws and be bothered by them, which, to be fair, I probably do. And in other episodes I don't like, I probably nitpick and notice flaws and complain about things that other people may disagree aren't flaws or not care about. And so I guess that's just the difference in that I actually do like this episode. And so I'm not noticing flaws everywhere, whereas there are other episodes that I don't like that I will notice flaws everywhere. And I don't know. I think even the red shirt, who's, blue shirt, Giamotto, like, he seemed like a developed character, even though he didn't appear that much in the episode. He was a geologist. He had knowledge of the area, whereas most of the red shirts are just nameless security guys who just are there to die. Where, obviously he was to an extent, but he seemed like an actual character. And also, like, I love how Kirk went into survival mode. Like, as soon as they, could scan that the Enterprise was no longer there, they were, speculating about, well, what happened to it? Is it still alive? Did it destroy? And again, this is not other stupid guy was complaining, oh, why didn't they were more concerned? Why aren't they showing more emotion over the fact the Enterprise could have just been destroyed? Because they're in survival mode. It makes total, in fact, not only does it make sense, I like it. I like how they jump straight to survival mode when the Enterprise is not there. There's no point in speculating what happened to it. Of course, Kirk is not as big of a dick as out of character Spock is to a horror, but really, essentially, it's the same thing. There's no point in dwelling over the fact that the Enterprise isn't there. They need to accept the situation that it's not, and they need to behave as if it's never coming back in order to survive. Survival is the first order of business, and so they need to find food, water, shelter, and means to survive. And I love that, actually. And I think that ties into the theme of that which survives. And at the end of the episode, when McCoy and Spock are arguing about Losar being beautiful, where McCoy says she's beautiful, and Spock is like, beauty is, doesn't really have anything to do with anything. And Kirk says, beauty survives. And of course this podcaster guy was like, what does that even mean? It means, as a whole ties into the episode about surviving, it's a metaphor. God, don't you even know metaphors? Like, it's a whole metaphorical thing about beauty being something that is, that transcends different meanings and different perspectives, and it will sort of always be there. I think it's a beautiful line. Because beauty survives. But whatever. But yeah, and then we get the reveal at the end where the reveal of who these people are, which again this podcaster is complaining about being an expedition dump, but I actually like it. I think it needs to be at the end of the episode. I think it adds a lot of, it's really what makes me like this episode. It's really what makes this a fascinating concept to me, because it adds an interesting concept of there being this outpost, this alien outpost that was wiped out by this virus, and they were waiting for other people of that alien race to come and help them, but they actually spread that virus to other people, and so they had the security system in place expecting their return for people who never were going to return. There's something very melancholy, very sort of tragic about that again, it has that season 3. I talked about this in some of my other videos about how I like that season 3 feel of the darkness and sort of melancholic feel that it has that the previous 2 seasons doesn't, which is why I'm certain now why I prefer season 3 over season 2. Because I do like that, and I like the tone of that and how that makes you feel after watching this episode. Now, the one thing I will say is that I do feel like there should have been more to this episode, and that's kind of why my opinion of this episode has went down a bit over the years, because there's not that much to it other than this computer system trying to kill our main characters. That's basically it. That's what the episode boils down to, and so there kind of needs to be more to it, but I think the details do make it more interesting than that basic plot. Had it been, for example, just a monster going around going and ripping people to shreds with talons, that's not as interesting to me. But having this whole backstory of this alien race who were wiped out, and they're setting up this computer system, and they're using the image of their leader who has empathy and it's interfering with, like, all those aspects make it more contextually interesting to me, which is why I do still find this episode really interesting. Now, the one thing I do really need to mention is that this is the final and second appearance of Dr. Omega in the original series, who is only in a couple of really brief scenes. And apparently this was kind of a last minute change, but it makes him unique character in the original series, because had he just been in one episode, he would just be another one-off. But he appears in 2 episodes, makes him the rare reoccurring character who actually has lines. I mean, there's also O'Reilly in season 1, but I think Dr. Omega is always more memorable because he does have a very distinct personality, which does come off more in A Private Little War, to be fair, than this episode, because he doesn't appear that much in this episode. But I do like the inclusion of him, and of course this is what leads him to make him a main character in Strange New Worlds. So I still understand how he's going to get demoted from Chief Medical Officer. Maybe Strange New Worlds will explain that. But anyway, so now is the time that I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very helpful, really helps the channel to keep going, and I just can't say thank you enough. So I shall read out the names of those who do support me. Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manijester, Joe Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelesio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. As I said, very much appreciated. So we have a singular comment from a Patreon supporter on this episode, and it's from Manny Jester, who says, I think this episode is pretty average. I like that Scotty has a lot to do and saves the ship at the end, but the stuff on the planet just seems to drag, and the ending is a bit of an anticlimactic. The computer program gets fooled easily by Sulu McCoy just standing in its way, but it's also intelligent enough to go up to the Enterprise and sabotage the ship. Its abilities didn't seem consistent to me. The backstory of the alien race setting up the outpost and then dying of a disease felt a bit shoehorned in. I know DC Fontana wasn't happy with how this episode turned out. I would be interested in finding out her original outline. It was probably better in the end. 5 out of 10 from me. Yeah, so that's fair, but as you could probably tell, there's a few things we disagree on. For example, I love the backstory with the aliens. That didn't seem tacked on to me. It seemed to enhance the episode, but that's just my opinion. And also the thing about the computer's powers being inconsistent is, I don't know if I totally agree. I mean, maybe a little bit, I will admit, but again, that's another thing I kept willing to overlook that doesn't really bother me. But again, that is just me. So there was, when I first watched this episode recently, there was this line that was said in the episode, and it made me think of something clever that I wanted to say. And by the time I finished watching the episode, I completely forgot what it was. And I went back to try to rewatch the episode to refresh my memory of what it was, and it wasn't coming to me. And so it was gnawing at me. It was eating at me. It was like, what was it? And I couldn't think of what it was. So I was like, I'm not going to remember this. So I just recorded my review. But now, a couple days later, I'm editing this in because I finally remembered what it was that I wanted to say. So, when D'Amato died and Sulu was talking to Kirk and saying, oh, that's a horrible way to die. And Kirk said to Sulu, well, there's no good way to die. And I think, Mr. Kirk, that Tyrion from Game of Thrones would disagree with you there, because Tyrion talked about when he was asked how he wanted to die, he came up with what I thought was actually kind of a good way to die. So I think Mr. Kirk is wrong. I think Tyrion would disagree with you. So my rating for That Which Survives out of 10 is a 7, very good. And as I said, I'm sure I'm much higher than most people would be, but I've always liked this episode. And to be fair, in the past, I would have probably I think I had given this episode a 9 when I was a teenager. But, as I said, Spock's character flaws, the fact that he's acting completely out of character for the entire episode, definitely brings the episode down. The fact that I do think there needs to be a little bit more to this episode that is a bit more simplistic also brings it down a little bit, but I still think it's a solid episode. I still was engaged throughout. I like the character interactions between Kirk, McCoy, and Sulu on the planet. I like how they're trying to survive, and again, I like the nuance of the thing that's trying to kill them taking on the image and replicating a person who actually is very, empathetic and doesn't really want to kill. I think that brings a nice flavor to the episode. What's and the backstory with the aliens, I think, is a very fascinating concept, and it has this very melancholic tragedy feel to it, which I like. So, yeah. overall, I'm sure I'm like way more positive than the majority of people. But yeah, I actually kind of like this episode. But again, I'm not giving it an 8 or a 9 like I used to. So I'm not that like over. It's not as big of a disparity as, say, Alternative Factor, for example. But yeah, I'm sure that I am more positive than most people. So be it. Because as I said, like when I come on to do these reviews, I'm here to give my honest opinion, not cater to what people want to hear or what other people think about it. But that is in fact just me. So I'm trying to find out where this is rated on IMDb, if it is really that low. And it's number 70 out of 80, so it's like the 11th lowest rated. So it is quite low, actually. And yeah, I would actually have this higher than a lot of the episodes. So yeah, this would probably make my top 40, which is splitting because there's 80 episodes, so it would be in the better half as opposed to the worse half. But that's just me. I don't know why, but I've always liked this episode. Maybe it is a bit nostalgia, but whatever. Anyway, that is it for my review of That Which Survives. So, if you're not aware, I'm currently doing taking votes for my top 10 best and worst episodes of the original series as voted by you, the viewer. So if you haven't, please submit your top 10 best episodes and your top 10 worst episodes. Please note that these comments I will be the only one who sees them. I will delete them to make everyone not aware of how other people are voting, so it's more sort of pure. And so if you have something to say that you want to be kept up on the video, don't include it in the same comment as your top 10s, because those posts will be deleted, so only I will see them. And then at the end next month, around a month's time, we'll do a live stream with my sister where we will tally the results. So the more results, the better. Like the more votes we get, the better I think we would. So if you haven't done this yet, and I'm giving you a whole month to do it as well. So if you haven't done this yet, please submit it to any one of my videos. Definitely am really looking forward to hearing your all opinion instead of always hearing me do my opinion, my top 10s this time. Let's hear from you guys. Very, very interested to see how my particular viewership will vote on this. All right, so now coming up on my channel in the coming days, we have, let me just bring up this list, which is ever elusive. Where are we? So Wednesday will be Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, revisited over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters, where I will revisit my review for that great episode. Thursday, new episode review public on my channel, Whom Gods Destroy, which I'm so looking forward to. Saturday will be review for another new public review for The Mark of Gideon, and then back here on Monday for another new public review for The Lights of Zatir. So yes, really looking forward to doing those reviews. So yeah, but anyway, be sure to check out my channel for more Star Trek videos and videos of many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.